It's tough as a technologist because you're like, yeah, I can do that. I can totally do that, right? And some of these projects sound really fun. So figuring out what not to do, I think as a technology company is almost more important than figuring out what to do.
Driving sustainable growth for a B2B company can be daunting, especially when trends in marketing are evolving so quickly. The road to success is continually under construction, so you have to be on the lookout for new insights to help you drive growth. Welcome to TrendSpotters. Our goal is to provide practical wisdom through brief conversations with B2B thought leaders to help you grow your business. Here's Candace to introduce today's guest.
In our last episode, Rob Hegarty and I talked about the need to be constantly aware of market shifts so that you can pivot your company in time and take advantage of new opportunities. I wanted to explore that more, so I reached out to Carson Conant, the founder and CEO of Mediafly. He's got some real-life examples of both market and customer-driven pivots. Carson started Mediafly in 2006 as a podcasting app. He has successfully executed 3 dramatic pivots in the company's 11-year history. He moved from audio to video, he shifted from a consumer focus to an enterprise focus, and he shifted from strictly a video and content distribution platform to now an extensible sales enablement platform. In our conversation, Carson shares 4 keys to successful pivots and gives detailed examples of how he used these keys to build his company. And it's working. Mediafly has been on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing private companies 4 years in a row. So let's join the conversation. So Carson, thank you so much for joining me today. I have been so excited to talk to you, and I'm really glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. So you've built Mediafly over the course of a long time, and you've gone through some pretty serious pivots. So I'd really like to talk to you about that process today and how you pivoted the company and how you've turned it into what it is today. So let's start with how it got started.
So I came from an entrepreneurial family. I always knew I would start a company. I didn't know what it was, and I had the idea for Mediafly after reading Jack Walsh's Straight from the Gut, Built to Last, and Good to Great on a boat trip.
All at once?
All pretty much at once, kind of back to back, and came back from that thinking, I got to start a company, and the core of my company needs to be the people that I hire, versus kind of my previous thinking, which was I need to be the smartest guy in the room and come up with some idea. So my original idea was to create a podcast distribution platform when podcasting was kind of becoming big. That's what we started off doing. I set out to do that and hired somebody great to help me start that company.
Were you a big fan of podcasts at the time? Is that what made you think of that?
Yeah, so the funny thing is I wasn't, but I was a big fan of the idea of having some sort of device that would queue up content for you based on what you were interested in. And an uncle of mine actually recommended podcasts, and when I discovered this free library of thousands of different things, of everything you could possibly imagine, that's what I realized would be the source of my content.
Okay.
And so that my job as a technologist would be, how do I organize and package that content up in a way that would make sense and be usable to a regular person? And so what I found with podcasting was it felt techie to me, and it still feels that way to me. You download it, you delete them, you add them. It's a very manual process, and what I wanted to create was more of like a radio experience. Like I tune into a series of news content or politics or sports or whatever I'm into, and then I would just get queued up based on what was out there, and it would be this technology would be pulling from all the different podcasts that were available, and then what I liked or what I didn't like would then determine what I got next. And so that was the original vision for the company.
So, all right, so you start out from the podcasting, and how long did it go before you started your first pivot?
Yeah, so we started off originally, we built this core technology that the first job was to aggregate and index all the podcasts that were out there. And so we were very successful as a podcast aggregation portal. We had, a million users at one point. We were integrated into a lot of consumer electronics devices.
What year was this?
This was like 2007 to 2009.
Oh, cool.
If you bought an Onkyo home stereo that was internet connected at the time, there would be a Mediafly button on there.
Wow.
And if you bought, I think it was Logitech had a bunch of different devices that you could tune into podcasts. There would be a Mediafly option there. And so technologically it worked and people loved it. And what was interesting was it wasn't a big money generator yet. Our plan was to grow and then start to interstitially stick in advertising,
okay.
And then track what was being listened to by who, because they were actually using our applications to consume this and sell that data back to the
stats
back to the podcasters.
I would love to have the stats for my podcast.
It was still a brilliant vision.
It was, yeah.
Just ahead of its time. But what was interesting was, and luckily for us, we had these relationships with hardware companies like Roku. And so when enterprises, particularly once video started happening, enterprises started going to the hardware companies and saying, how can we use this to distribute video content for different purposes in a private, controlled way? And particularly on like a television or on some sort of mobile device, right? And so those first companies were Remax Television Studios, and Roku said, well, we provide this great hardware, and Mediafly is one of our early partners, and we got that partnership because we were this rich source of podcast content.
Sure.
And so they sent them to us, and their interest was, how do we publish and host and distribute content, kind of like a podcast, but for private distribution.
Oh, wow.
And so we said, that's interesting. And fortunately, it was a big enough pain. And once we found out how much these companies were willing to invest in it, we shifted the focus of the company pretty quick.
Suddenly there's a revenue model.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And, with the mortgage invested in this and credit cards maxed out and, I had 2 new kids at this point, relatively new marriage. It was
stressful time.
It was a stressful time, and it was neat that the core team that I had put together and the technology that I'd put together was really perfect for this new use case, and it fit a big growing need. And so it was a pretty neat pivot. Now, it took us a while to figure out, is the enterprise side paying the bills until the consumer side catches up?
Oh yeah, you're deciding, right?
Or is the consumer side what made us relevant, and we should chop that off like a dead limb? And so we ran that kind of in parallel for a couple of years, and it became so obvious that the enterprise, relationships and the challenges we solved there were so much more interesting and valuable. And so,
wow.
so we phased out the consumer stuff.
A long time ago, so this was in 1999, I was working for a company called Qubit Technology. And basically what we were trying to build was an iPad, but you didn't have the mobile data that you have today. It was like really rough to do it. And we took apart a Sony Vaio computer.
Sure.
Put it in a frame that we'd had custom designed that would make it like a handheld, stuck a touchscreen on top of it, ran Windows in the background, but it was like buried so that, you're really seeing Explorer. And we would show it to people as our prototype. And the CEO really wanted to build a consumer-oriented company. He wanted a device for his mom to be able to get on the web and not have to struggle, because this was back when AOL was trying to be the gated garden or whatever, right? Walled garden. And so his idea was that we were going to make money on every purchase, but they were going to cost us $800 to manufacture. And I was getting all of these orders as the business development person from corporate people that wanted to buy them for insurance adjusters to go out and fill out the forms online, right? And they didn't want our walled garden. They just wanted a device. And they're like, we'll pay full price for this. We don't care if it's beautiful. We don't want your walled garden, but we'll pay $800-900 for these devices. Could not get him to make that shift.
Wow, he would have been ahead of his time.
Right? It would have been really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, disappointing, but I did get to be on CNN showing it off, so that was kind of cool. Going back to yours, so you guys actually figured this out and made this shift.
I'm not sure how much wisdom there was. I think it was desperation and opportunity.
Yeah, we needed that income.
I think, and just the delusional optimism of this great company that I was putting together, and really the people that I had hired. And so I can't take credit for the pivots we've made along the way. At each one of these pivots, my immediate reaction is, how does this give me an opportunity to hire some great people that can help me take advantage of this? And so with this next pivot, I had to let go of my first person. I let go of my original CTO, who was a really brilliant technologist, and I was looking for essentially a kind of a new leadership team that was really focused on selling to the biggest companies in the world, right? And delivering technology for the biggest companies in the world and helping me run a company that was going to do this. It was very different than I had originally set out.
Yeah.
So I hired the 3 co-founders of the second generation of Mediafly.
Okay.
And so and that team, we together figured out how to make this enterprise pivot. and made that successful. And then,
So what year was that?
So that was about 2009 to kind of 2011 was probably where that pivot happened over.
Okay.
But it was pretty obvious pretty quick that the enterprise was where it was going to be.
Where you needed to be. Okay.
And honestly, it was so much more fun because when you're doing a consumer-facing thing, you add a little bit of value to a lot of people's worlds. And with enterprise, and they're very far away, right? You don't get this close connection with them.
You don't get the feedback.
You don't get the feedback, or if you do, it's lots of little feedback, right? And so what I found that was so exciting about the enterprise space was you're solving a really big problem. They're paying you a significant amount of money, and you're adding a lot of value to somebody's daily life. They literally can't do their daily life without it. And
That's
so
cool.
you become critical to the company and critical to the individuals using it, and that was much more fun.
Yeah.
And still to this day, my favorite thing is hearing what we're doing for the biggest companies in the world and the problems we're solving for these companies.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I love it.
That's very cool. So then there was a video pivot. Was that at the same time?
So that was kind of the same time. Honestly, really the video, when podcasts moved from audio to video, and the video iPod came out, we realized, this is not an audio play. We originally were named Audiofly.
Okay.
I switched the name to Mediafly, and we started to get good at video. And that's actually one of the things that made us so powerful is video is not as easy as audio, and it's much harder than documents and that kind of stuff. And so the fact that we had built a transcoding capability so we could take in lots of different video codecs and make them play across all these different devices made us really unique. So that is really why these enterprises came to us. So there was kind of there was a pivot kind of a year into Mediafly, which was kind of the pivot from audio to video. And that's really what enabled this enterprise move for us.
Okay.
And so and then kind of the next big pivot was we didn't know if our role was going to just be content distribution of any form, right? So we had audio, we had video, we had added documents at this point, and companies could use this to distribute that collateral securely amongst their people on set-top devices or on mobile devices, on laptops and on the web. And so for a little while there, we were just content distribution. We were a platform. And
were you sales enablement at that point?
No,
Is that what they were doing?
It was so we were indifferent to what they were doing. We had the TV and movie studios were using us for distributing dailies and rough cuts and screeners. That's a use case that's still being used. They still use us for. They were using us for training materials. Some companies were using us to distribute content for their end consumers. Some people were using it for sales collateral. And we didn't really care. We were indifferent. What was obvious as we moved along was that the need for, it's kind of like you described with your device, the need to put high quality, relevant, up-to-date sales collateral in the hands of salespeople, particularly really big companies, was a big problem they're facing. And they still face that today, companies that don't use a platform like Mediafly. And so that just became an obvious thing for us to focus on. It was really fun. You had a lot of great people that you get to work with. We really got to bridge the gap between marketers and sellers. So marketing people could manage sales collateral in a solution like Mediafly, knowing that it's going to be in the hands of their salespeople,
immediately,
within
right?
seconds, right?
And it's accessible and findable.
Right,
I think that's the biggest problem for content today is it's not findable by the sales team.
Exactly. It's not findable, and if they can find it, usually that's done the night before. Then they're modifying it in PowerPoint, and then they've orphaned that from the core material forever, right?
Right. And now I've got to go find those edits that I made for the next meeting because something went over really well, and it's where did I put that? Right.
And anybody in sales knows the moment you go into a meeting, it never goes the way you're planning.
Right.
And so you either have to build a really big presentation that has all the different permutations of where this could go. And then you have to do I get to that on slide 35, so let me either jump to that or, wait till the end of the meeting. So because we came from this podcast world where the idea was, wait a minute, no, you can just jump around. If I want to listen to the next segment, if I want to switch from politics to sports. So we had kind of always had this mentality of quick shifting. And this kind of, it has to be a consumer simple experience that my mother could use, right? And so we brought that to the enterprise, and still to this day, I think it's one of the unique things we bring is that we design consumer-feeling applications for enterprise people, right?
So salespeople can stop taking their 120-slide deck and putting their audience to sleep with all of these irrelevant slides before they get to the one slide the audience wants to see.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. Yep. And marketing can stop creating 120-page decks.
Right.
They can create lots of different 1 to 3 page presentations. And in that scenario where I didn't think I was going to talk about X, Y, and Z, I can jump over to that piece. It's all available offline. It's all built into the application.
Don't have to have a pre-built deck.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
yeah.
I should be able to swim around like a swimming pool and move wherever I want to. It shouldn't be this rigid flow, right?
Right. Like as if I was on a whiteboard.
Exactly.
Oh, you want to talk about this?
Right.
Okay. Well,
Right.
then let me erase what I just put up there. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of companies will train their people, spend a lot of money training whiteboard presentations.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why they do that is they want something that feels more organic than,
Mm-hmm.
hey, you know, I'm going to go to the next page. And so we allow the movement through content to feel organic. It goes the way that the conversation's going, right? And I think Forrester said only 8% of B2B buyers think that the sellers add value. I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
92% don't add any value. And the reason is that you come in with a prepared notion of what you want to talk about, and you're relatively rigid on what else I can talk about.
Relatively? I don't think so. I think you are rigid.
And so it's obviously not what's important to me that you're here to talk about. And so we shift that on its head, and you come in with a hypothesis of what you think you want to talk about, and you're prepared for your meeting. But if you, as the buyer, want to go off in a different direction, ask me about different products, or I should be doing some discovery, and based on what I'm finding out, I should be able to pivot and go talk about that, right?
Exactly. It's like I like to use, when I'm selling, a Q&A process. Tell me more about this. Tell me more about this. But I often, because I don't tend to bring decks to a sales call for that exact reason, I don't want to get into this rigid presentation mode. I'd rather be on the whiteboard. I'd rather engage the client, because I always know if the client grabs the pen, I've got him.
Yep.
You know?
Good point. Yep.
But, you know, sometimes you do need those prepared slides, and, you know, it's always so clunky in PowerPoint to go find the right slides. So that actually sounds really cool.
Exactly. And I think what's really neat, kind of the next wave of what we're doing, I'm not sure if you'd call it a full pivot, but it's definitely an evolution, which is kind of the helping companies move into a much more interactive sale. And so even if I'm showing you what's relevant, more of those pages should be dynamic, where if I've got a graph, I can enter some real data in here about you, or I can grab some of these sliders and move them up and down so that the actual content feels much more like a whiteboard, but it's what you could never do on a whiteboard.
Right. So tell me more about how that kind of evolved, because now you're talking about functionality that you're bringing in that is, again, kind of another technological pivot, right?
Yeah.
So how did you make that shift to start creating this? It was like a technological pivot to start adding all that other functionality, right? What was the driver behind that?
So I think it was a combination of luck and opportunity. We started to realize that companies wanted very different experiences for their different use cases. And so unlike the podcast world, where we could create an application and the way that two people navigate content is probably going to be very similar, right? What we found was a lot of companies PepsiCo wanted a very different way of navigating their content than Disney did. And rather than create our product to be super configurable, which really becomes very fragile, our CTO, Jason Shaw, decided, what if we build this layer of kind of extensibility on top of Mediafly, and so that they can get exactly what they want instead of having to be constrained to what we had kind of come up with. What then happened was really 4 companies, PepsiCo, Miller Coors, Disney, and NBC Universal, started doing really interesting things and building interesting sales stories on top of Mediafly. They really showed us about this interactive selling. And so we looked at that, and we looked at the results they were getting, and said, you know, they've got a great idea, but for a platform like Mediafly with this extensibility, they couldn't be executing this idea. What if we doubled down on that sort of extensibility and brought that to all the companies that didn't have a vision yet? And that's really what we focus on now, is how do we have an incredible product out of the box that solves kind of that main content problem, but then how do we create this layer of really kind of an app exchange model, right? Kind of like Salesforce.com, so that companies can build exactly what they're looking for. Those companies really taught us about this what we now call evolved selling. We kind of looked at what are the commonalities amongst these companies and what that they're doing that's special, how do we package that up and then take that to the rest of the market?
So it sounds like every single pivot has kind of been customer driven. Like you find an opportunity, you figure out how big the opportunity is, and you just go, okay, we're going there.
Yep. There's a lot of companies, I think, that can make big mistakes by investing in what they think is what the market needs versus paying attention to what the market needs and then quickly moving there.
So how do you go about that? Like, what was the process that you used to figure out what the customer needs? All of your pivots were customer driven, and clearly you were listening. How did you go about listening? Because I see a lot of companies struggling to listen broadly enough. Like, they'll listen to one customer and they'll go down that path instead of listening to enough customers to know if there's actually a business opportunity.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I know exactly, other than I can kind of look back on our history and what happened. I think what's interesting about us is we're a Chicago-based, Midwest, humble company with a bunch of great technologists. And so I think we don't assume we know everything, right? And so I think we assume we've got great technology and we've got ideas, and we kind of put them out there in little kind of MVP fragment forms, but we're not delusional enough to think that we've got all the answers. And so we wait to see what people pull on. And if they pull on them, then we invest quickly and heavily in those things.
Okay.
And I think what that does is it means that those customer ideas are not competing with, well, we've got these 9 other things that we're trying to build because this is what the market really is going to want, right? Instead, we just kind of have this iterative and minimum viable product methodology. We used to try and build things sometimes, and you'd get frustrated because you built something that didn't get used, and then the customers wants these other things. And so we started saying, look, until a customer really pulls on something, we're not going to build it.
Okay.
But we're going to put these ideas out there in some sort of way that they can respond to,
play around with,
whether it's in slides or whatever. And then if they grab on it, if anybody buys it, then we have enough resources and speed, we can deliver it before they really need it.
Okay.
And I think that we've designed our whole company around that sort of, empathetic pragmatism.
Pragmatism, I like that.
And then the ability to invest quickly on what they pull on.
So that's sort of like Disney Imagineering, just storing things up, don't throw anything away.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some classic examples where I was absolutely convinced that something I wanted to do was the next big thing. And our internal team is strong enough, and I've delegated enough of the authority so that they could say, nope, we're not doing that, Carson. You got to find somebody who wants to buy it first. And then I would go around
That's cool.
and some people, I would suggest things, and some people would say, I love that, but they would never buy it, and we didn't do it. And turns out it was the right move not to do those things.
Right. Yeah, it could be fun to do, but does the customer actually want it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of things where I think that you'll get a lot of validation. We'll partner with companies, and I see them in this cycle of investing in what companies say, if you just had this, we'd buy from you. If you just had this, we'd buy from you.
Oh my gosh, salespeople are renowned for doing that too. Yeah.
And it's tough as a technologist because you're like, yeah, I can do that. I can totally do that, right? And some of these projects sound really fun. So figuring out what not to do, I think, is, as a technology company, is almost more important than figuring out what to do.
I think that's fundamental to strategy. And any strategy is deciding what you're not going to do.
Yep. And I think that was another big thing, which was that the team that I put together has been very good at stopping doing things that either used to be things that were working but no longer are. So we've been willing to say no to new customers that we felt like were a distraction. We've been willing to let certain segments of customers that were working go away instead of trying to just keep that revenue because it was a distraction, and allowed us to really focus on where we're going versus having all these kind of threads that were untamed.
I get the impression you also have to make failure safe, because letting those clients go has to be feels like failure, but at the same time it needs to be safe, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, I would say, I don't know if this is Chicago or our Midwest roots, but failure is very safe here, right? And we actually have had a couple failures in our years where I had to, I got called on the mat and had to go to particularly in the early days, had to go to a customer, fly across the country and make apologies. And there was never once where we blamed the people who are responsible or blamed the technology or anything. At the end of the day, that's one of the things that the pride of hiring absolutely stunningly brilliant people is, if something goes wrong, it's not for any lack of effort or intention or anything, right? And so, this is a team. We've built a team where everybody goes into battle with such tough confidence in everybody else that if something happens, it's it can happen to anybody, right?
Well, and let's talk about it. Let's openly admit that this didn't work and do a postmortem and really open it up, because we gain so much in our business from failures that we're really open about and just like, let's examine this. Why did this not work?
Right, yeah.
And you can make lots of lemonade out of that.
Yes, and I think actually some of our best customers, you have little failures all along the way. And I think we turn little failures into big successes. If you have a phenomenal customer success focus and team, you can turn little failures into big successes, right? And I think all along the way, when the company saw how we responded to challenges, they weren't freaked out when the next one happened.
Right. So they're willing to take risks then.
Right, yes. And their feeling became, Mediafly will solve this. If there's any challenges, I can call the CEO directly and he'll help this, but I probably don't need that. And ultimately, the company and the relationship is stronger for it. And I think that's why we've been able to grow our accounts, in a lot of cases, 10 times what they originally started at.
That's really cool. So if you kind of sum it up in terms of what makes for a successful pivot, I know that you've talked about people, we've talked about failure and listening to the customers. Can you just kind of like...
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head probably better than I could have summarized it. But I think it's having the right people so that when an opportunity comes along, they're open to new things, right? I mean, I think if people are rigid to, no, this is where the market needs to go, then you're not open to those new ideas, right? And then I think being willing to stop doing things you were doing before, because a pivot doesn't work if you're still dragging along the old thing, right? I mean, you really have to break free from what had been there before. Right. And I think we've done that a couple times, and I think in each place that was critical.
And on occasion, you've had to leave some people behind and bring on new people.
Yeah, I think particularly in those early days, when we made a big pivot, such as from consumer to enterprise, I realized I needed to hire some different people than I had, right? Or at least I needed to surround myself from a leadership standpoint with people that had expertise that I didn't have, right? And honestly, my favorite thing in the world is hiring, the cliche of hire people smarter than you, right? But I absolutely love hiring people smarter than me. Now, I think
great.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I'm uniquely talented at being the conductor of really talented, in some cases high maintenance people, but it's amazing what they do when you can get them all working together and go in the same direction.
Right. That's really cool. And then listening to the customers. Are you good? Do you guys have a process now to make sure you're listening to the customers other than what you said about putting out those MVPs?
So I think the first thing we do is just culturally. I mean, we hire empathetic people. I mean, that's a term we use a lot here. So I think that when that's part of your culture, and if you kind of bleed for your customers, it just means you're listening a lot, right? So I think that's important, and also internal communication, the ability for something that somebody heard on the customer success side, then being able to float that to product or to engineering or something like that and have that and kind of inform the future, I think is critical to that success.
Right. So I think we're out of time, Carson. This has been such a fun interview. Thank you so much for joining me on this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And you're our first in-person interview, by the way.
All right, great. Thank you.
Wow, what a great story from Carson. The 4 themes that I took away are the importance of hiring the right people, validating ideas and opportunities with real customers who are willing to pay, making failure safe for the organization, and dropping the good to get to the better, even when that means walking away from paying customers. Michael Porter said the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do, and Mediafly's story definitely offers proof of this. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Do you have any ideas for future guests? If you do, would you please send your suggestions to trendspotters@propelgrowth.com? You can get more information about Carson and Mediafly at mediafly.com, or visit propelgrowth.com/trendspotters and scroll to episode 13. There, you'll find a transcript for this episode and links to Carson's website and social profiles. And while you're there, check out our other episodes. Each session dives into topics that help you drive growth in your business. Join me in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, thanks for listening. We hope you found value in today's episode and welcome your feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes or Stitcher. We'd really appreciate your help with getting the word out about TrendSpotters. Could you please review us on iTunes and share the podcast on LinkedIn and Twitter? Thanks. For more insights on smart business growth, visit us at propelgrowth.com.